She quenched her thirst from cracked cisterns, slept on insect-ridden straw mats, and bore the weight of a pregnancy that could cost her life. Not through nature, but through public stoning. She carried a newborn in her arms while fleeing a massacre of children across more than 400 kilometers of desert. And she did all of this before her 16th birthday. This is the brutal true story of Mary of Nazareth. Consider the place where everything begins. First-century Nazareth was not a city. It was a cluster of houses carved into limestone rock, home to somewhere between 200 and 400 people. Archaeological excavations conducted since 1955 and intensified from 2009 onward by the Israel Antiquities Authority have revealed what remains of that village. Houses of 1 or 2 rooms, rough stone walls coated with a rudimentary mortar of mud and straw, low ceilings held up by uneven wooden beams covered with dry branches and a layer of packed earth that had to be rebuilt every rainy season. Dirt floors, minimal ventilation, the permanent smell of smoke saturating every room, because the only way to cook and generate warmth was a fire fed by dried animal dung and sticks. This was the world Mary lived in. Think about the daily routine of a young girl in that village. She woke before sunrise. Her first task was to fetch water, likely from the village's single source, carrying a ceramic jar that weighed between 8 and 12 kilograms when full, balanced on her head or braced against her hip. The distance from home to the water source could be 300 to 500 meters, a journey repeated 2 to 3 times each day. Studies in physical anthropology of ancient Mediterranean populations show that this repetitive activity caused chronic vertebral compression in young women, especially when it began at puberty. Mary likely began this routine at 6 or 7 years old. The diet was sparse, barley bread, not wheat because wheat was too expensive for artisan families, made up 60 to 70% of what they ate. It was supplemented by olives, dried figs, lentils, and occasionally salted fish brought from the Sea of Galilee, roughly 35 kilometers away. Meat was a luxury reserved for religious festivals. Nutritional studies based on food remains found at first-century Galilean archaeological sites estimate that the average daily caloric intake for an ordinary woman hovered between 1,300 and 1,500 calories. For comparison, the World Health Organization considers that an adult woman needs at least 2,000 calories per day to maintain basic health. By modern standards, Mary lived in a state of chronic malnutrition. Now consider the social context. Mary was a young woman betrothed in marriage to Joseph, described in the Gospels as a tekton, a Greek word appearing in Matthew 13:55 that can mean carpenter, stonemason, or builder more broadly. The profession placed Joseph's family among the artisan class, one step above slaves and day laborers, but well below merchants and priests. The most concrete evidence of Mary and Joseph's economic standing appears in Luke 2:22-24. When they presented Jesus at the temple, they offered 2 turtle doves as their sacrifice. The law of Moses, in Leviticus 12:6-8, specified that the standard purification offering was a 1-year-old lamb. The offering of birds was the alternative permitted exclusively for those who could not afford the lamb. They were too poor to buy a lamb. Now observe the moment that split Mary's life into before and after. Luke 1:26-38 records the Annunciation. The angel Gabriel appears to Mary and declares that she will conceive a son by the Holy Spirit. The text says she was troubled, in Greek diatarachthi, a verb indicating profound agitation, almost physical in nature. This was not poetic surprise, it was genuine terror, because Mary understood perfectly what this meant in practical terms. She was a betrothed young woman, still a virgin, and she was now going to be pregnant. Examine what the law prescribed. In Deuteronomy 22:23-24, the text is direct. If a betrothed woman was found with another man in the city, both were to be stoned to death. The legal reasoning was that if the encounter happened within the city, the woman could have cried out for help and did not, which presumed consent. Mary's pregnancy, with no connection to Joseph, was the visible evidence that any neighbor, relative, or religious leader could interpret as adultery. In a village of 200 to 400 people, hiding a pregnancy was physically impossible. Feel the true psychological weight of this. Mary was likely between 12 and 14 years old. This is the age range at which first-century Jewish girls were betrothed, according to rabbinic sources such as the Mishnah, compiled around the year 200, but based on much older oral traditions. The tractate Niddah, chapter 5, Mishnah 4, indicates that feminine maturity for marriage was recognized at 12.5 years. A teenager then, in a culture where family honor was the most valuable social currency, where public shame could result in permanent exclusion from the community. And she said yes. Consider Joseph's decision. Matthew 1:19 describes Joseph as righteous and records that he resolved to divorce her quietly without making a public example of her. This decision reveals two things. First, Joseph initially did not believe in the divine origin of the pregnancy. His reaction was human and understandable. Second, even in his doubt, he chose to protect her from the maximum humiliation. A secret divorce would avoid a public tribunal, but it would not prevent permanent suspicion. Mary would carry that social mark for the rest of her life in Nazareth. People talk, people remember. In the village where everyone knows each other by name and by 3 generations of genealogy, doubt about a child's origins never disappears. And it did not disappear. In John 8:41, religious leaders throw a revealing phrase at Jesus: "We were not born of sexual immorality." The construction of the sentence in Greek with the emphatic pronoun "we" carries a pointed insinuation. They were saying, decades later, that they knew about Jesus' questionable origins. The stigma followed Mary her entire life. Now, witness the journey to Bethlehem. Luke 2:1-5 records the census ordered by Caesar Augustus that required Joseph to return to Bethlehem, his ancestral city. The distance between Nazareth and Bethlehem is approximately 150 kilometers in a straight line, but the actual route, skirting mountains, descending through the Jordan Valley, and climbing the Judean hillside, covered between 170 and 190 kilometers. Mary was in the final stage of her pregnancy, likely in her 8th or 9th month. The journey was made on foot. Some travelers used donkeys, but even mounted on a donkey, the constant jolting over uneven stone tracks, the pressure on the hips and spine of a woman in advanced pregnancy, and the heat of the Judean desert made every kilometer a physical ordeal. Estimates based on the average speed of caravans of the period suggest the journey took between 4 and 7 days, depending on pace and stops. 7 days of walking through the desert, 9 months pregnant. And upon arrival, there was no room. Luke 2:7 records that Mary gave birth and laid the newborn in a manger because there was no place for them in the katalima, a Greek word that can mean a guest room or communal lodging. Archaeological excavations in Bethlehem and in first-century Judean villages show that houses frequently had a lower level where animals were sheltered at night. Inside the residence itself, the manger was not a separate, romanticized stable. It was the animal's space on the ground floor of an overcrowded house. The smell of dung, urine, and moldering straw filled the air. Temperatures at night in Bethlehem could fall below 5 degrees Celsius in winter, and there on that floor Mary gave birth, without a midwife, without clean water, without any of the minimum conditions that even the poorest women of the era considered necessary for a safe delivery. maternal mortality in the ancient world was brutal. Paleodemographic studies estimate that between 1 in 25 and 1 in 40 women died during childbirth or in the weeks that followed from hemorrhage, infection, or complications. For adolescents whose pelvis was not yet fully developed, the risk was even greater. Mary survived. But giving birth in conditions of extreme deprivation left lasting damage that ancient medicine had no way to treat. Now follow what came immediately after. Matthew 2:13-15 records the flight to Egypt. Herod the Great, upon learning from the Magi that a king of the Jews had been born, ordered the execution of all male children 2 years old and under in the region of Bethlehem. Joseph received the warning in a dream and departed that same night with Mary and the infant toward Egypt. The distance from Bethlehem to the Egyptian border is roughly 80 kilometers, but the family's likely destination, the Jewish community in Alexandria or in the Nile Delta cities, was more than 400 kilometers away. The route crossed the Negev Desert and the Sinai Peninsula. A woman who had just given birth, possibly days earlier, carrying a newborn across one of the most arid and dangerous routes in the ancient world. Temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius during the day and dropping near zero at night. Water sources separated by 30 to 50 kilometers. Bandits who attacked unprotected caravans. Snakes and scorpions on the sand trails. And they were not fleeing toward a better opportunity. They were fleeing a massacre. The Roman historian Macrobius, in his Saturnalia, written around the year 400, records a remark made by Emperor Augustus about Herod, that it was better to be Herod's pig than his son. The king's reputation for brutality was known across the empire. Josephus, in Jewish Antiquities, Book 17, details executions ordered by Herod against members of his own family, including his wife Mariamne and at least 3 of his sons. A man capable of killing his own children was perfectly capable of massacring the children of a village. Mary carried her infant through the desert, knowing exactly what would happen if they were found. Now calculate the time in exile. The biblical text does not specify the exact duration, but Herod the Great died in 4 BCE according to the most widely accepted chronology based on Josephus. If Jesus was born between 6 and 4 BCE, the stay in Egypt may have lasted from several months to 2 or 3 years. These were years of forced displacement. Refugees in a foreign land, without family networks, without property, without stable income. Joseph likely worked as an itinerant artisan, taking whatever work he could find in Egypt's Jewish communities, which numbered between 800,000 and 1 million people, according to estimates by Philo of Alexandria. But being a poor immigrant in a foreign land with a young child meant permanent vulnerability. Witness the return and what came after. Matthew 2:21-23 records the return to Israel after Herod's death, but to Nazareth rather than Bethlehem, out of fear of Archelaus, Herod's son who ruled Judea with an equally violent reputation. Back in Nazareth, Mary faced the task of rebuilding a life that had never known stability. And now she carried a son about whom the entire village held both memory and suspicion. Notice something that is rarely mentioned. Mary had other children. Mark 6:3 names them: James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, along with sisters whose number and names are not recorded. Allowing for at least 2 sisters, Mary raised at minimum 7 children, in a 1- or 2-room house, on an artisan's income. With births spaced between 1 and 3 years apart, as was common in the period, Mary spent possibly 15 to 20 years of her life in continuous cycles of pregnancy, nursing, and recovery, while simultaneously carrying out all the domestic labor of a large household, grinding grain by hand in a stone mortar, a task consuming 2 to 3 hours each day, fetching water, baking bread, spinning wool, weaving cloth, tending a garden if there was one, treating the children's wounds and illnesses with whatever was available: olive oil, wine, herbs, and prayer. Without antibiotics, without painkillers, without any understanding of bacterial infection, infant mortality in the first century was devastating. Demographic studies estimate that between 30 and 40% of children died before reaching 5 years of age. Diarrheal disease, respiratory infections, intestinal parasites, and malnutrition were constant killers. There is no biblical record that Mary lost any child in infancy, but the statistics suggest she lived under that threat continuously. Every fever, every cough, every day a child refused to eat was a silent alarm that death might be drawing near. And then came the prophecy that never left her. Luke 2:34-35 records the moment when Simeon, in the temple in Jerusalem, 40 days after Jesus' birth, took the infant in his arms and said to Mary, "A sword will pierce your own soul." In Greek, the word used is rhomphaia, not a small dagger, but a long, broad-bladed sword used in combat. The image was of a weapon of war passing through a mother's soul. Mary heard this while holding her 40-day-old son in her arms, and from that point on, every moment of Jesus' life carried a shadow for her. Luke 2:51 says that Mary kept all these things in her heart. The Greek expression syneterai indicates not merely memory but active rumination. She processed, revisited, tried to understand. Every word spoken about her son, every sign that he was different, every indication that the future would bring pain. Follow the episode that revealed the first fracture. Luke 2:41-50 recounts the journey to Jerusalem when Jesus was 12 years old. After the Passover festival, the family began the return to Nazareth and traveled a full day's walk, 25 to 30 kilometers, before realizing Jesus was not with the caravan. They turned back to Jerusalem, another day's walk, and they spent 3 days searching. 3 days. A mother searching for a 12-year-old boy in a city with an estimated population of 30 to 40,000 during Passover, when the temporary population could reach 100,000 or more, according to Josephus's estimates. The narrow streets of Jerusalem, the alleyways, the pilgrims camped outside the walls, the impossibility of covering the entire city in any short span of time. And with each passing hour, the question eating her alive: is he alive? Is he hurt? Has someone taken him? When they finally found him in the temple, debating with teachers of the law, Jesus' response was bewildering. "Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Luke 2:49 records that Mary and Joseph did not understand what he meant. This detail is revealing. Even knowing of Jesus' divine origins, even having received the angel's visit, even having heard Simeon's prophecy, Mary did not fully comprehend what was happening. Faith and confusion coexisted, and this would continue for decades. Examine the period the Gospels nearly fall silent about, between Jesus' 12th year and the beginning of his public ministry, around the age of 30. There is a gap of approximately 18 years in the biblical record, but historical tradition and the logic of the sources point to an event that profoundly altered Mary's life: the death of Joseph. Joseph disappears completely from the Gospels after the temple episode. He is not mentioned at the wedding in Cana in John 2. He is not mentioned during Jesus' ministry. He is absent at the crucifixion, where he would be expected to appear. The most historically probable conclusion is that Joseph died before Jesus began his public ministry. If Joseph was between 18 and 25 at the time of the marriage, and if he died before 50, the male life expectancy among the working classes in the ancient world was 30 to 35 years. According to paleodemographic studies based on skeletal analysis from the period, Mary was widowed, likely with children still dependent on her, without the family's primary income. In a society where a widow without adult sons depended on community charity or the support of relatives, Mary was likely sustained by Jesus' work as an artisan, the same trade as Joseph, and eventually by her other older sons. But widowhood in a first-century village meant loss of social standing, loss of legal protection, and constant economic vulnerability. Silence over those years, but the pain was there. Now witness the beginning of Jesus' ministry and what it meant for Mary. In Mark 3:21 and 3:31 to 35, there is a disturbing episode. Jesus is teaching in a house so crowded that they cannot even eat. And the text says that those with him, in Greek hoi parautou, an expression that includes close family, set out to restrain him because they were saying, "He is out of his mind." Jesus' family, including possibly Mary, tried to intervene because they believed he was losing his sanity. Consider what this meant for a mother. Her firstborn son, the family's support after Joseph's death, had abandoned the artisan trade. He had left home. He had gathered followers. He had begun making claims that scandalized the religious community. And now, even his own family was hearing that he had lost his mind. In Nazareth, Luke 4:28-30 tells us that Jesus' townspeople tried to throw him off a cliff. The very people Mary had known since childhood, her neighbors, the family's friends, tried to kill her son. She watched the entire village turn against him, and the distance between Jesus and his biological family grew. In Matthew 12:46-50, when someone told Jesus that his mother and brothers were standing outside wanting to speak with him, his response was public and sharp. "Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?" And pointing to the disciples, "Here are my mother and my brothers." For a woman raised in a culture where family bonds were the most sacred structure in society, those words carried a weight that the written text cannot fully convey. It was not rejection, but it felt like it. Follow what intensified across those 3 years of ministry. Mary heard reports. Jesus was confronting Pharisees and Sadducees. He healed on the Sabbath, defying tradition. He claimed authority over the temple. The powerful men of Jerusalem were plotting his death. In John 11:53, the Sanhedrin formally decided that Jesus must die. This was not an abstract threat. It was a pending sentence issued by the highest tribunal in the nation. And Mary knew. Consider the final week. Jesus entered Jerusalem acclaimed by crowds on Sunday. On Thursday night, he was arrested. On Friday morning, he was brought before Pilate's tribunal. And there, the sequence of events that fulfilled the prophecy of the sword. First, the flogging. The Roman flagrum was a leather whip with multiple strands, each tipped with pieces of bone or metal. The blows tore through the skin in layers, exposing muscle and, in extreme cases, ribs and organs. The traditional number of lashes was 39, but Roman sources indicate there was no formal limit. The blood loss during a flogging was so severe that many prisoners died before reaching the cross. Medical studies published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1986 described the physiological effects: hypovolemic shock, circulatory collapse, massive tissue trauma. And Mary was in Jerusalem that day. John 19:25 records with surgical precision. Standing near the cross of Jesus was his mother. She did not flee. She did not hide. She did not keep her distance. The Greek text uses the expression para to staro, beside the cross, near the cross, close enough to hear the agonized breathing, close enough to see the blood running, close enough for Jesus to see her and speak to her. Roman crucifixion was designed to be the most painful and humiliating form of execution ever devised. The nails, 12 to 18 centimeters in length, were driven through the wrists, between the carpal bones, and through the feet, piercing the metatarsus. The weight of the suspended body caused progressive asphyxiation, to breathe. The condemned had to push himself upward by pressing down on the nails through his feet, causing excruciating pain with every breath. Death by crucifixion could take anywhere from 6 hours to 3 days. Jesus, already weakened by the flogging, died in approximately 6 hours according to the chronology of Mark 15. 6 hours. Mary stood beside the cross for 6 hours. Observe what a mother's body does under those circumstances. Studies in neuroscience and grief psychology show that witnessing the torture of a child activates the same brain regions associated with physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. Extreme emotional pain produces the same physiological responses as physical trauma. Elevated cortisol, increased blood pressure, immune system suppression. The expression "dying of grief" is not merely metaphor. Extreme stress can cause Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome, a condition in which the cardiac muscle deforms under acute emotional stress. Simeon's sword was no longer prophecy, it was physiological reality, and in the middle of that agony, Jesus looked at his mother and at the disciple John and said, as recorded in John 19:26-27, "Woman, behold your son," and to the disciple, "Behold your mother." In that moment, suspended between life and death, Jesus reorganized his mother's future. He knew she would be left alone. He knew she would need protection. And with whatever strength remained in him, he made certain someone would care for her. From that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. Calculate what came after. Mary was likely between 45 and 50 at the crucifixion, assuming she was around 14 at Jesus' birth and that Jesus died at approximately 33. By first-century standards, she was already an old woman. Female life expectancy in the region was 35 to 40 years. Mary had outlived the average, and now, without a husband, without her firstborn, dependent on the kindness of her son's disciple, she faced whatever years remained. Acts 1:14 records the last direct mention of Mary in the New Testament. She was in the upper room in Jerusalem, gathered with the apostles and other disciples in prayer, following the ascension of Jesus. The woman who had begun this journey as a terrified adolescent in Nazareth was now sitting in an upstairs room in Jerusalem, waiting for something she could not see or predict. And after that, the silence of the canonical texts. Early Christian tradition preserved fragments. Epiphanius of Salamis, writing in the 4th century, claims that Mary lived to the age of 59, though other traditions suggest 69 or even 72. There is no certainty about the place of her death. 2 cities make the claim: Jerusalem, where the Church of the Dormition on Mount Zion marks the traditional site, and Ephesus in present-day Turkey, where the House of the Virgin Mary, discovered in the 19th century, based on the visions of the mystic Anne Catherine Emmerich, draws hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. No historical source from the 1st or 2nd century records Mary's final years in verifiable detail. What is known is constructed through inference. She lived within the circle of the early church. She almost certainly witnessed the explosive growth of the movement founded by her son. She saw a community grow from 120 people in the upper room to thousands within weeks, according to Acts 2:41. She saw men and women who had never known Jesus give their lives because of him, and she carried with her until her last day the complete memory, the Annunciation, the flight, the desert, the poverty, the years of silence, the rejection in Nazareth, the distance of a son who had become something she could not fully hold, the cross. No other human being in the biblical record witnessed the full arc, from the supernatural conception to the violent death to the proclamation of the resurrection. Only Mary was present at every point of that narrative, and at none of them was life easy. Christian iconography across 2,000 years has covered Mary in gold, celestial blue, and stars. It has painted her serene, elevated, almost ethereal. Raphael, Botticelli, Caravaggio all created versions of Mary who look more like European royalty than a poor young woman from Galilee. The crowns, the mantles, the heavenly thrones have obscured the real woman. The woman who drew water from cracked cisterns, the woman who ground grain until her hands bled, the woman who crossed a desert carrying a newborn, the woman who stood upright while nails were driven into her son's hands. Mary's suffering was not spectacular in the way that art suggests. It was daily, repetitive, and relentless. It was hunger that does not end, uncertainty that does not pass, pain that has no name because no one around her recognizes it as pain. It was waking up every day knowing that the sword was out there somewhere in the future, waiting for its moment. And when the moment came, she did not step back. 2,000 years later, the city of Nazareth has more than 80,000 inhabitants. The Basilica of the Annunciation, consecrated in 1969, covers the traditional site of Mary's house with reinforced concrete, imported stained glass, and a dome rising 55 meters high. More than 2 million pilgrims visit the site each year. They pass through a courtyard decorated with mosaics from dozens of countries. They light candles, they take photographs, and they rarely think about the dirt floor that once existed there, the cold, the smell of dung, the teenager who said yes without knowing the full price of what she was accepting. But the price was paid, in full, over decades, without pause, without respite, without the glory that cathedrals suggest. Mary did not live a life of privilege sheltered by grace. She lived a life of suffering amplified by mission. Every blessing came paired with a blade. Every revelation brought a burden. Every moment of divine presence demanded a human surrender that no art has managed to portray with complete honesty. Simeon's sword did not pierce her soul all at once. It pierced slowly, millimeter by millimeter, across the length of an entire life. And she remained standing,